You won't believe what happened to me. Imagine stepping outside one morning to enjoy your coffee, only to find your backyard completely taken over by strangers. Not just strangers, but two entitled Karen sisters who thought it was perfectly fine to transform my property into their personal wedding venue. Chairs lined up across my grass, a massive arch standing where my garden once bloomed, and dozens of people stomping across the yard like they owned it. I stood there frozen in shock, wondering if I had lost my mind or if this was some twisted dream. But no, it was real. These women had broken into my backyard, set up for a full wedding, and acted like I was the intruder. When I confronted them, they brushed me off with the audacity only Karens could carry, telling me to be a good neighbor and let them borrow the space. Borrow, without asking, without permission, with my property destroyed in the process. My rage boiled under the surface as they laughed in my face and went back to ordering their guests around. They thought I would back down. They thought I was weak. They thought they could steal my space and walk away without consequences, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I watched as clouds started to roll in, the ground already soft from yesterday's rain. An idea sparked in my mind, a perfect, muddy revenge that would turn their fairy tale wedding into a nightmare no one would ever forget. If they wanted my backyard, they were going to get it, all of it. Mud, rain, and chaos included. And when I was done, those entitled sisters would never dare cross me again. Saturday mornings were usually my favorite time of the week. I had no alarm clock screaming in my ear, no work deadlines, no rushing traffic, just me, my coffee, and the quiet hum of the neighborhood. My backyard had always been my safe space. I had spent years tending to it, planting flowers along the fence, keeping the grass green, and building a small vegetable patch in one corner. It wasn't huge, but it was mine, and every inch of it carried my effort and care. That morning, I woke up later than usual. The sun was already high, slipping through the curtains, and I could hear faint noises outside. At first, I thought it was kids playing down the street. Nothing unusual. I stretched, grabbed my coffee mug, and headed to the kitchen. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as I poured myself a steaming cup. I took the first sip and sighed, ready to sit by the window and watch the birds flutter around the feeder I had hung last spring. But then I froze. Through the window, I noticed movement, too much movement. My backyard was alive with people. At first, my sleepy brain didn't process it. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, the more I focused, the clearer it became. Rows of chairs lined the grass. White ribbons were tied around them like some Pinterest wedding post. A tall wooden arch decorated with flowers stood proudly in front of my vegetable patch, and people, dozens of them, were bustling around, carrying boxes, setting up tables, laughing like they owned the place. I blinked several times, rubbing my eyes. My coffee nearly spilled out of my hand. This couldn't be real. Who in their right mind would walk into someone else's yard and set up an entire event without asking? That's when I spotted them, the Karen sisters. They lived a few houses down, known in the neighborhood for being demanding, loud, and entitled. They complained about everything: dogs barking, kids playing too loudly, cars parked too close to their driveway. Everyone tried to avoid them. They had that permanent scowl on their faces, the kind that made you want to cross the street whenever they walked by. And now, there they were, standing in my backyard as if they had just claimed it. One of them was barking orders at a group of men struggling with a table, while the other adjusted her hair in a mirror. My jaw dropped. My coffee cup hit the counter as I stormed toward the back door. My blood was boiling. The moment I stepped outside, the sound hit me in full force: music, blasting from speakers, laughter, clinking glasses. Nobody even looked at me. It was like I didn't exist in my own yard. "What the hell is going on here?" I shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few people turned, gave me quick glances, then went back to what they were doing. My fists clenched. That's when one of the sisters, Karen number 1, strutted toward me. She wore a smug smile, the kind that screamed arrogance. "Oh, you're up," she said casually, as if we were old friends. "Don't worry, we'll be out of your hair in a few hours. Just relax, it's a special day." I stared at her, stunned. "A few hours? You've set up a whole wedding in my backyard without asking me." Her sister walked over, rolling her eyes. "It's just for today. You've got such a big yard, and honestly, it's nicer than ours. You should be honored we chose it." Honored? I nearly choked on my words. "This is trespassing. You can't just break into my yard and throw a party." Karen number 2 gave a dismissive wave. "Oh, stop being dramatic. Be a good neighbor for once. We'll clean up after, promise. Be a good neighbor." My yard was already destroyed, my garden trampled, grass flattened under the weight of tables and chairs, decorations tied to my trees, and they had the audacity to act like I was the unreasonable one. "You didn't even ask me," I snapped. "This is my property. You had no right." "Look," Karen number 1 interrupted sharply. "It's already happening. Guests are arriving. Food is being set up. Are you really going to ruin someone's wedding just because you're a little uptight about your lawn?" Her words stung, not because they were true, but because she said them with such confidence, as if I was the intruder here. Around us, people kept setting up, ignoring the heated exchange. The entitlement was staggering. I tried to keep my voice steady, though my hands were shaking with rage. "You have exactly 10 minutes to clear all of this out, or I'm calling the police." That finally got their attention. Both sisters froze, their smug expressions faltering. For a moment, I thought they'd back down, but then Karen number 2 smirked. "Go ahead," she said. "By the time they show up, the ceremony will be over anyway." Her sister laughed. "Yeah, and do you really want to be known as the jerk who ruined a wedding? The whole neighborhood will talk about it. People will hate you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were manipulating me, trying to guilt me into letting them get away with this. Meanwhile, more guests began arriving through the side gate, dressed in fancy clothes, smiling, carrying gifts. Some of them glanced at me awkwardly, realizing I was the homeowner, but not one of them offered to help or stop the madness. They just followed the sisters' lead. I felt trapped, furious, powerless, but deep inside, beneath the anger, something else stirred. A thought, a plan. I looked at the sky. The clouds were darkening, heavy with the promise of rain. The ground was already soft from yesterday's storm. My backyard was on the edge of becoming a mud pit. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. If they wanted to use my backyard, they were going to regret it. I turned on my heel and walked back into the house, ignoring the sisters' smug laughter behind me. Let them enjoy their fantasy for now. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken control, but they had no idea what was coming. The rest of the morning felt like an out-of-body experience. I sat in my kitchen, staring out the window, sipping coffee that had long since gone cold. Every time I looked outside, my blood pressure spiked. My once peaceful backyard, the space I had built with care, was overrun with strangers who stomped on my grass, leaned against my fence, and laughed as though they owned it. The Karen sisters strutted around like queens, one in a white dress that wasn't quite bridal but close enough, the other in a matching outfit, probably her maid of honor. Their shrill voices carried over the noise, giving orders to guests and vendors. They hadn't even tried to keep things discreet. No, they wanted everyone to see what they were doing, as if stealing my property was some kind of neighborhood event. I gripped the edge of my table, my mind racing. I could call the police, sure, but they weren't wrong about one thing. By the time officers showed up, the ceremony might be underway, maybe even finished. The damage would already be done, and I knew exactly how the sisters would spin it. They'd cry, talk about how I ruined their special day, and somehow I'd be painted as the villain. The thought of them walking away with their smug grins, bragging about how they'd gotten away with this, was unbearable. I needed something better, something they wouldn't expect, something they'd never forget. That's when I noticed the sky. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, thick and heavy. The air itself seemed to hum with the promise of rain. I could almost smell the storm coming. The ground was still damped from yesterday's downpour, and I knew from experience that my lawn turned slick fast when it got wet. Guests in their fancy shoes and dresses would have a hard time keeping their footing if the grass gave way to mud. An idea sparked. A wicked, delicious idea. I grabbed my garden gloves and slipped quietly out the side door, circling to the shed where I kept my tools. From there, I could see the chaos unfolding without being noticed. People were fussing over decorations, carrying trays of food, and setting up a massive cake on a table. The sisters barked orders, completely oblivious to my presence. I opened the shed and pulled out my garden hose. It was long enough to stretch across the entire yard, and I knew exactly where to place it. The soil in the middle of the yard was already soft. It wouldn't take much to turn it into a swamp. My heart pounded as I uncoiled the hose and snuck it around the back, hiding it behind bushes and under tables. Guests were too busy fussing with their outfits to notice me crouching low, hands steady. I attached the nozzle and positioned it near the base of the arch where the ceremony would take place. If things went the way I imagined, the ground would collapse into muck right where everyone would be standing. I turned the faucet on, just enough for a slow but steady stream to soak the soil. The hose hissed softly, blending into the background noise of chatter and music. Nobody noticed. As I worked, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my neighbor across the street, an older man named Jim who had lived here longer than anyone. "You seeing this circus? They really took over your yard." I smirked, my fingers flying across the screen. "Don't worry, I've got a plan." A moment later, his reply came, "Can't wait to see it." I tucked the phone away, adrenaline surging. This wasn't just about my backyard anymore. This was about teaching those sisters a lesson in respect. They thought they were untouchable, but today they were going to learn what happens when you cross the wrong neighbor. By noon, the guests were seated. The chatter had grown quieter as music swelled from the speakers. The arch stood tall, dripping with flowers, while the sisters beamed at their audience. One of them, Karen number 1, was about to walk down the makeshift aisle, her smile wide, her chin lifted in pride. I stood at my back door, arms crossed, pretending to watch casually. Inside, my stomach was a knot of nerves. Would the plan work? Would anyone catch me? Then I felt the first drop of rain. It splashed against my arm, cold and sharp. Another followed, then another, until the sky opened up completely. Guests gasped as the drizzle turned into a steady shower. Umbrellas popped open. Dresses clung to legs. The sisters shouted for people to stay calm, insisting it would pass, but the ground had other ideas. The hose had been running for nearly an hour, softening the earth beneath the arch. As the rain poured down, the soil transformed into mud, slick and treacherous. I saw the first bridesmaid wobble, her high heel sinking into the muck. She shrieked, clutching the arm of another woman, who toppled down with her. The guests panicked. Chairs tilted, feet slipped, expensive suits and dresses splattered with brown stains. Someone knocked into the cake table, sending the towering masterpiece sliding sideways until it collapsed in a gooey heap. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Karen number 1, standing proudly under the arch, took a single step forward. Her heel plunged deep into the mud. She tried to pull free, but the suction held tight. Her sister rushed over to help, only to lose her balance and land face first in the muck. Gasps and laughter erupted all around as the so-called queens of the day thrashed helplessly in the swamp that had once been my backyard. I leaned casually against the doorframe, a grin spreading across my face. The rain soaked everything, washing away their fake flowers, their ribbons, their carefully planned decor. Their perfect day had turned into a disaster, and I hadn't even lifted a finger well except to turn on the hose. As chaos reigned, I caught Jim watching from his porch across the street, laughing so hard he nearly doubled over. He raised his coffee mug in a silent toast, and I nodded back. The sisters screamed, their makeup running down their faces, their voices shrill and desperate. But it was no use. The guests were already leaving, muttering complaints, their shoes ruined, their clothes ruined, their patience gone. I stayed quiet, letting the storm and the mud do the talking for me. My revenge was unfolding perfectly, and I didn't need to say a single word. The rain slowed to a drizzle, but the damage was already done. My backyard looked like a battlefield. Chairs were overturned, shoes abandoned in the muck, and the once pristine cake was nothing but a soggy heap sliding down the side of the broken table. Guests hurried out through the side gate, some holding ruined shoes in their hands, others shaking mud from their clothes as they cursed under their breath. Like the stars of the show, the Karen sisters were still stuck in the middle of it all. Karen number 1, her once white dress now stained brown, stood ankle-deep in sludge, shrieking at anyone who came near. Karen number 2 flailed around, trying to scrape mud off her arms, her face twisted with outrage. Their hair, once perfectly styled, hung in wet clumps plastered against their cheeks. Karen number 1 finally screeched, pointing at me as I leaned calmly against the doorframe. Her voice cracked, shrill and desperate. "You did this. You ruined our wedding." I raised an eyebrow, pretending to look surprised. Me. I didn't invite 100 people into my backyard. I didn't set up tents and chairs on wet ground. Don't blame me for your bad planning. Karen number 2 stomped toward me, her heel breaking off and sinking in the mud. She cursed, hopping on one foot before giving up and ripping the other shoe off. She hurled it in my direction, but it landed with a splat a few feet away. "Don't play dumb. You sabotaged us." I let out a short laugh. "Sabotaged you? You trespassed on my property. You broke the law. If anyone here should be blamed, it's you." The guests that remained, mostly family members and close friends, stood awkwardly nearby, some clearly embarrassed, others trying not to laugh. One older woman muttered something about karma under her breath, earning a glare from the sisters. Karen number 1 stomped her foot, sending a splash of mud onto her already ruined dress. "You're going to pay for this. I'll sue you for damages." That was my breaking point. I stepped forward, my tone firm but calm. "Sue me for what? Protecting my own property. You broke in without permission. You destroyed my yard. If anyone's paying for damages, it's you." Her face twisted with fury. "We were trying to have a special day. What kind of monster ruins a wedding? The kind of monster who doesn't like being walked all over," I shot back. My voice carried over the yard, and a few guests nodded in quiet agreement. The sisters looked around, suddenly realizing they weren't getting the sympathy they expected. Their audience was gone, their perfect event ruined, and their control slipping away. Still, they weren't ready to surrender. Karen number 2 crossed her arms, glaring at me. "You think you've won, don't you? But everyone will know what you did here. Everyone will talk." I shrugged. "Go ahead, tell them. Tell the whole neighborhood how you trespassed into my yard, trashed it, and then blamed me when it rained. I'm sure that'll win you plenty of sympathy." Her glare faltered, if only for a second. From across the street, I noticed Jim still standing on his porch, phone in hand. He caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. I realized then he'd been recording the whole thing. My confidence soared. Even if the sisters tried to twist the story, the truth was already documented. The sisters bickered with each other now, their anger spilling over. "I told you we should have rented the hall," Karen number 1 snapped. "Oh please," Karen number 2 shot back. "You said the yard would be perfect and free. Don't blame me for your cheapness." Their voices rose higher, shrieking at one another like crows. Guests exchanged looks and slowly drifted away, unwilling to stay for the meltdown. Soon, it was just the sisters, a handful of relatives, and me, standing in the wreckage. I walked forward, my boots squelching in the mud. "Listen carefully," I said, my voice low and steady. "I don't ever want to see either of you in my yard again. You will clean this mess up, and if I see even one piece of trash left behind, I'll have the police at your door. Do I make myself clear? Karen number 1 opened her mouth to argue, but Karen number 2 grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Her glare was still full of venom, but I could see the fear creeping in. They knew they were beaten. You'll regret this. Karen number 1 spat, her voice weak but still sharp. We'll make sure of it. I smirked. Funny, I was just about to say the same thing to you. With that, I turned and went back inside, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart pounded in my chest, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was satisfaction. From the window, I watched as the sisters struggled to gather what was left of their decorations, their once proud wedding reduced to muddy scraps. They argued the whole time, pointing fingers at each other, slipping and sliding through the mess. Every so often they'd glance back at my house, but I didn't care. They could glare all they wanted. The victory was mine. As the last of the guests trickled away, the sisters finally gave up. They left my yard in shambles, storming out through the side gates, their clothes soaked, their pride shattered. I exhaled deeply, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Jim texted me a few minutes later. But the whole thing on video. Classic drinks at my place later. I smiled for the first time all day. Count me in, I replied. For the first time since that morning, I allowed myself to relax. The chaos was over, but I knew this wasn't the end. The sisters weren't the type to admit defeat quietly. They'd try something else, some new scheme, some way to get revenge, but they had no idea I was ready for them because, if they wanted a war, they had just declared it on the wrong neighbor. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of damp earth drifting through the open window. My yard was still a wreck. Mud streaked across the grass, broken chairs lay in piles, and the flower arch leaned sideways, half collapsed like a wounded soldier. It looked less like a wedding had taken place and more like a natural disaster had torn through. I brewed coffee and walked out onto the porch, surveying the damage. The Karen sisters had left most of their mess behind, just as I expected. Plastic cups, soggy napkins, and smashed decorations littered the ground. My vegetable patch was ruined, trampled beyond recognition. The whole scene was a reminder of their arrogance. As I sipped my coffee, Jim strolled over from across the street, still chuckling. Well, he said, nodding at the wreckage, that's one way to end a wedding. I shook my head. One way, sure, but I doubt it's the end. You know them. They won't take this lying down. Jim smirked and lifted his phone. Good news is, I got every second of it. The mud, the cake falling, their screaming. Even caught Karen number 2 throwing her shoe at you. Priceless stuff that made me laugh for the first time since the chaos. Maybe I should frame that video. You should post it online, Jim said. Entitled Sisters Get Muddy, instant classic. It'd go viral. The idea was tempting, but I shook my head. Not yet. Let's see what they try first. My guess is they'll come storming back before long, and I wasn't wrong. By the afternoon, the sisters showed up at my front door, still fuming, though this time dressed in their usual athleisure gear instead of mud-stained wedding clothes. Karen number 1 pounded on the door like she was trying to break it down. I opened it slowly, calm as ever. What do you want? I asked, keeping my tone flat. You're going to pay for this, she snapped, jabbing a finger at me. You ruined the most important day of our lives. Her sister pushed forward, voiced even louder. We've already spoken to our lawyer. You'll be hearing from him. The damages to our decorations, our dresses, our food. I cut her off with a laugh. Your lawyer, please, go ahead. Call the cops while you're at it. Tell them how you trespassed, destroyed my property, and then blamed me when it rained. You'll lose faster than you can blink. Their mouths opened and closed like angry goldfish. For once, they didn't have a snappy comeback. And by the way, I added, my neighbor recorded the whole thing, every second. So if you want to take this to court, I've got proof. I suggest you think carefully before embarrassing yourselves any further. Karen number 1's face turned crimson. She hissed through clenched teeth. You think you're so clever? But you haven't seen the last of us. Then they spun around and stormed off, slamming my gate so hard it rattled. I watched them leave, an uneasy knot forming in my stomach. They weren't bluffing. I could see it in their eyes. They were plotting something, and if I knew anything about the Karens, it wouldn't be subtle. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me think they were outside, snooping around, looking for another way to make my life miserable. I locked the doors, double-checked the windows, and even set up my old motion sensor light in the backyard. If they wanted a war, I was ready. The following days were quiet to quiet. The sisters didn't come around, but I noticed them whispering to other neighbors, pointing at my house whenever I walked by. One afternoon I overheard them telling Mrs. Henderson, the sweet old lady on the corner, that I was a cruel man who sabotaged their family celebration. I nearly laughed out loud. Their lies were transparent, but they told them with such conviction you'd almost believe them. The problem was, not everyone knew the full story. A few neighbors started giving me strange looks, their smiles tighter than usual. The sisters were poisoning the well, trying to turn the community against me. That's when I realized their revenge wasn't going to come in the form of smashed windows or late-night pranks. No, they were going to attack my reputation. But they underestimated one thing. I wasn't going to sit back and let them control the story. The next weekend, I invited a few of my neighbors over for a barbecue. Nothing fancy, just burgers, hot dogs, and some drinks. Jim helped me set up, and of course he insisted we hook up his phone to the TV in the living room. "Trust me," he said with a grin, "if they're spreading lies, you need to show the truth." Sure enough, halfway through the evening, one of my neighbors cautiously asked, "So, is it true you ruined their wedding on purpose?" I smiled, gesturing toward the TV. "Why don't you see for yourself?" Jim played the video. The room erupted with laughter almost immediately. The sisters slipping in the mud, guests running for the gate, the cake collapsing in a heap. It was comedy gold. But the best part was how clearly it showed the sisters' entitlement from the start. Their smug faces, their dismissive words, their arrogance. By the time the video ended, my neighbors were shaking their heads in disbelief. "Unbelievable," Mrs. Henderson said. "And here they were, telling us you destroyed everything out of spite. Looks like karma destroyed them just fine." Another neighbor chuckled. Relief washed over me. The sisters' attempt to ruin my reputation had backfired. Instead, they'd exposed themselves as selfish liars. And now, the whole neighborhood knew it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The Karens weren't the type to give up after one humiliation. If anything, this would only make them more desperate. As I cleaned up after the barbecue, Jim clapped me on the shoulder. "You handled that perfectly. But don't let your guard down. Those two are stubborn. They'll try again." I nodded, staring out at my scarred backyard. The grass would take months to recover, the garden even longer. But that was fine. I could handle a ruined yard. What mattered now was staying one step ahead of the sisters. Because deep down, I knew Jim was right. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The weeks that followed were strangely calm. After their failed attempt to sway the neighborhood against me, the Karen sisters kept their distance. I saw them from time to time, glaring from their porch or whispering to one another as I walked by, but they hadn't made any direct moves. At first I thought maybe, just maybe, they had learned their lesson, but then the letters started arriving. The first one was anonymous, stuffed in my mailbox, written in clumsy block letters with a red marker. "We're watching you." The second was slipped under my door in the middle of the night. "You'll pay for what you did." Each note was childish, almost laughable, but they were also unsettling. It was obvious who was behind them, even if they thought they were being clever. Jim, of course, found the whole thing hilarious. "They've gone from ruining weddings to arts and crafts," he joked one evening as we shared a beer on his porch. But I knew it was more than that. This was their way of saying they weren't finished, and I was right. One Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of shouting outside. Pulling on my robe, I stepped onto the porch and saw a small crowd gathered around my yard. The sisters were there, holding clipboards, waving papers in the air. "This man is a danger to the neighborhood," Karen number 1 yelled, pointing at me as though she were a prosecutor in court. "He destroyed our wedding, humiliated us in front of our friends, and now he's threatening us." Her sister chimed in, holding up one of the notes I'd received. "Look at this. He's been sending us threats. He's unstable." Gasps rippled through the crowd. For a moment, I felt a surge of panic, but then I noticed something that made me smile. Jim was standing right there, phone in hand, already recording. "Really?" I said calmly, walking down my steps to face them. "You're accusing me of sending threats? Because funny enough, I've been getting the same notes, and they're written in the exact same handwriting as yours." Karen number 2's face went pale. "That's ridiculous. You can't prove—" "Oh, but I can," I interrupted. "Because unlike you, I don't rely on lies. I rely on facts." I turned to the neighbors, who were watching with wide eyes. "You all saw the video of what happened in my yard. You saw how they treated me, how they treated everyone. Now they're making up stories because they can't stand the fact that their little scheme backfired." The sisters sputtered, shouting over each other, but the crowd wasn't convinced. Mrs. Henderson, the sweetest woman on the block, stepped forward with surprising firmness. "Enough," she said. "We've all seen how you two behave. You've caused nothing but trouble since you moved here. We're tired of it." Several others murmured in agreement. Someone else muttered, "Maybe they should move." For the first time, the sisters looked uncertain. Their power built on intimidation and manipulation was crumbling, and I wasn't about to let the moment slip. "I've kept quiet long enough," I said, raising my voice. "These two broke into my yard, destroyed my property, and tried to ruin my reputation. And now they're making false accusations. This stops today. Either they leave me alone, or I'll press charges for harassment. I've got all the evidence I need." Jim lifted his phone higher. "And so does the internet," he added with a grin. The sisters froze, realizing their every word was being recorded again. Their faces twisted in rage, but there was nothing they could do. They turned on their heels, storming off as the crowd dispersed, shaking their heads. That was the last time they ever confronted me directly. Word spread quickly. The sisters' reputation was ruined beyond repair. Nobody believed their stories anymore. Invitations to neighborhood events stopped coming. People crossed the street to avoid them. Their empire of entitlement had collapsed. A month later, a moving truck pulled up to their house. I watched from my porch as they loaded box after box, their scowls sharper than ever. Karen number 1 caught me watching and shouted, "This isn't over." But her voice cracked and I could tell even she didn't believe it anymore. By evening, the truck was gone. The sisters had finally left. I stood in my yard, the cool breeze rustling through the trees. My grass had begun to recover, new sprouts pushing through the muddy scars. My garden would take more time, but that was fine. Nature heals, and so did I. For the first time in months, I felt true peace. The Karens were gone. The neighborhood was united again, and I had stood my ground. They had tried to steal my space, my dignity and my reputation, but in the end they lost everything. As the sun set, Jim joined me on the porch with 2 beers. He raised his bottle. "To muddy justice," he said. I laughed, clinking mine against his. To muddy justice. And with that, the chapter closed, not just on the sisters, but on the storm they had brought into my life. Finally, I had my backyard back, and this time, it was mine alone.